So, as I said last time, the polarization, the division within the society, within Poland, was very substantial, with the right actually gaining the upper hand and disturbing and disallowing, actually, development of a better ways of life. The government, although it wasn't very far right, nevertheless went along with the tide which came, and especially it tried to suppress any forward-looking and progressive voices.
Of course, the Communist Party was illegal. Members of the Communist Party were sentenced to long prison terms.
And as I said also before, that there were arrests by minorities of especially Ukrainians. Then at universities there was introduced anomalous clauses, rules, and also the designation of special places for Jewish students. Of course, this caused protests and, among others, none of the Jewish students accepted the different rule of special places for them. For example, during any university lectures they were standing rather than sitting as a protest. The cultural life, however, was rather developed, and especially was rather more progressive and very vibrant. In other places there were theaters, and of course movies were everywhere, but movies at that time were not especially developed much yet. Also there were shown mostly American movies. There were some Polish movies also, but not too many. And the attendance in the theaters and opera and so on was quite large, and we tried to live rather normal lives at those times. As I said, we, the more progressive views, joined the Popular Front, and among others was quite active. But of course we didn't. The possibilities for acting in Poland for the Popular Front was not very positive. So all the activities were rather limited. When we sometimes put out pamphlets and newsletters, and on boards hanging announcements, the police, of course, tried to remove them and arrest the people who did that. Sometimes, at least twice, we were called off at these activities. But, to our luck, those times the head of the police, who was also teacher of Latin at the same time and supervisor of our senior classes, let us go free. At the same time, there were a large number of socialist-leaning activities and parties, some of them more deeply socialistic, and some were rather of the type of union activities. But the union activities in Poland were quite different than in the States, and they had always the political flavor of a socialist movement, and represented not only workers, but non-factory workers as well, which joined together in these movements. In some places, like in our town, the magistrate, which is the main seat of the town government, also had a socialist in power, and this in some degree helped me also later on, which I will be talking about. I said of our students in our high school, with time most of our class, not all, but most of our class, and mainly the boys, but also some of the girls, joined socialistic movements, which were based not only on ideas related to Poland, but also related to international matters. Our groups were mostly left-leaning socialist movement of the Shomer Hatzair organization, which was aimed to develop Palestine as an Israeli state, and through building kibbutzim, which are a kind of collective farms. And at that time our idea was rather naive, because we didn't know exactly the Muslim world, but we thought of a country which would not be divided, but joined by Palestinians and Jews together as one country. Of course, this came to nothing, especially with the action of the muftis and their support for Hitler, and of course with falsifying the views of the Jewish people who were coming to settle in Palestine based on the Balfour Declaration. But instead of a joint action in Palestine, there was complete disarray, which was later, especially before the last years before the war, very pronounced. And in making things worse, the Balfour Declaration was in some way disavowed because it was changed. Instead of being a Jewish place, the Balfour Declaration was changed for the benefit of the Arabs because of mainly oil interests. This was, and after calls for uprisings by the Jewish settlements, and especially after the war, when the drive to settle the refugees in Israel
became rather difficult because it was limited by the governing bodies of the English government.